Welcome to another Advanced Manufacturing Media webinar. Our presentation today is Completing the 21st Century Digital Factory Information Flow with a Manufacturing Execution System. Hello, I'm Mike Anderson, Senior Editor at Manufacturing Engineering. Before the presentation begins, I'd like to provide some background on what we will be doing today. Our sponsor today is Paperless LLC. Paperless is a technology leader and pioneer in manufacturing execution systems, software, and services, providing solutions and real-time insight for better management of complex manufacturing environments. For over 20 years, Paperless has consistently helped discrete manufacturing companies gain a competitive edge in an ever-evolving global market. Our presenter is Paperless Senior Manufacturing Consultant, Mike Kanick. Mike has over 20 years of experience in manufacturing, holding positions as Product Manager, Manufacturing Administration Manager, Operations Manager, Senior Manufacturing Consultant, and Regional Manager of Business Consulting. He has an MBA in Production Operations Management. Mike has been responsible for implementing, supporting, and improvement initiatives for manufacturing ERP systems for companies with multiple sites. Mike will be joined by Paperless LLC President Mike Leroy for the Q&A segment that will follow the presentation. Now about that, during the presentation, you will be able to ask questions using the Q&A box that appears at the right of your screen. Time permitting, your questions will be answered following the presentation. If time runs out before we can get to all the questions, we will make sure that the answers are emailed to you. Another housekeeping point. When viewing webinars over the internet, it's possible for the quality of the presentation to be affected by the type of internet connection you have, the amount of total bandwidth available to you, and the number of people accessing that bandwidth at the time. If you experience difficulty, please let us know by way of that Q&A box. If you have questions about any other aspects of our webinars, please email me at manderson@sme.org. I'll rejoin you after the presentation with a few concluding remarks. And now, here's Mike Kanick of Paperless. Mike?
Thank you. And I'd like to welcome all of you to our webinar today. I hope you find it to be quite valuable in the information that we're able to give to you. And I'd like to introduce our company just briefly. Paperless LLC, as Mike mentioned, we've been in the software provider industry for over 20 years. We serve customers from 10 million to 10 billion, so we deal with many different business models, and our current software sits on a Windows server. It's very easy to use, and it's available in French, German, Spanish, and even Mandarin Chinese. So we're pretty happy with it. If you have any questions about it, we can talk later. Starting the webinar, the purpose of what we're going to be talking about today is simply to educate you on the software environment, the technology environment that tends to evolve in manufacturing companies, make you aware of some of the issues, some of the traps and pitfalls that can be experienced along the way. We'd like to inform you all of what MES systems are all about and how they might benefit your companies, and in general try to generate some excitement about the possibilities of that MES might afford for your companies. So let's take a look at the situation involving internal systems. We're going to talk about ERP systems. There are very good points and there are some not so good points when we start talking about ERP. They tend to be oftentimes designed for a specific business model. They're not always as consistently good across the organization as we might like to think. And where that happens, we tend to see the influx of independent applications come in to meet gap requirements that may be experienced. And these independent applications certainly have an impact on the business as a whole that might have been unanticipated. So we'll talk about all of those things. And things tend to evolve over time within a business. The major component of the business system is generally the ERP package, and there are a number of different providers of ERP that you're probably familiar with. They range in scope from the sublime to the ridiculous. I recently worked with a company who paid a total of $4,000 for their ERP system. So there are some micro ERPs out there. But the ERP is generally a set of business applications that are very specifically focused on a particular function, such as finance or purchasing or customer service. And all of these tend to operate over an integrated database, and they apply the same data validation rules across the applications within the ERP package. And when a company goes through the selection process, and I've been there, it's really an interesting thing if you've not. When you go through final selection of an ERP, the specific package that you wind up with often depends upon who's the loudest during the selection process, during the evaluation. Almost always it's going to be some back office function, and they're good, like finance or purchasing or customer service, will drive that selection based on the importance of the function as it's seen in the business. And the problem with that is that the user interface, or the UI, usually favors back office operations where somebody is sitting at a desk and doing manual key punch or data entry or inquiries, et cetera, et cetera. But not all the areas can operate like that. And quite often, the big area that gets left out of a functional UI is manufacturing, because the guys on the shop floor are not going to really make good use of a system where they have to sit down and key in every piece of information. It's quite lengthy and really subject to error on their part. It's very frustrating. And what happens then, what we wind up with, is a situation where you've got everybody else working with the ERP package and getting everything input, and manufacturing is kind of left out on their own. And they need to have some kind of a way to get information into the system, because the manufacturing data is a key piece to managing the business. So we can't simply sit on our hands. And when a process is orphaned, and it can be any number of different processes, usually they try to find workarounds, and people are pretty resourceful, but that usually falls short of what they need. So what they're left with is you can find another application within the ERP package. Well, that's pretty unlikely, because rarely, if they don't have one good one, they're not going to have another one that will satisfy. Or you can begin the whole selection process and implementation all over again. That's not very likely, because that's a long, expensive process. So what do? They start looking for independent solutions to fit my problem, to fit my area. And when we start doing that, we need to consider the fact that the data is interdependent. And what I mean by that is, you have the same data. ERP wants certain pieces of that data. Production wants other pieces of that data. And each area is going to have its own access through ERP or another package. And where we really need to have good data integrity, that's when the independent solutions come with a price that may not be what we want to pay. The data needs to be integrated. We need to be able to assure that everybody is seeing the right thing at the right time and that it's consistent across the board. I don't know if it's happened to you, but I had meetings where I showed up and somebody will make a statement that'll say this job will be on time, and somebody else will say, I don't know what data you're looking at, but mine shows it won't. So you really have some concerns over local optimization because the independent packages may work fine, but unless they are connected to ERP within our ERP, you could have some problems. So now we're starting to search for the solutions, and they can't find one within ERP because they make the statement that nobody else has my requirements. It's a version of the old song, nobody knows the trouble I've seen. And as soon as we start with that understanding, we can only start looking for either independent packages or developing our own in Excel or Access. And I see a lot of Excel and Access applications when I get to customer sites. And it's really beginning to create a pretty bad situation because now we have one or more single-purpose solutions. You can have many separate systems and databases, and this is really dangerous. If you have these systems, it's going to involve, more than likely, redundant data entry, duplication of efforts, and all of this adds no value whatsoever. And worse, when you start looking at the workflows involved, if the worker has to go to one package to do his production reporting and another package to receive or issue inventory and another package to do some quality recording and then another package to print a label, the workflow is a disaster and it's really clumsy out on the floor. And that type of activity is certainly not consistent with lean practices. So the impact on the business when that happens, as soon as we start seeing independent solutions, that's when the business actually begins to develop a tolerance. If it works in one area, it'll probably work in another area. And then we have local optimization. We do have a really, really good process now using this particular application, but the rest of the system doesn't get the information that it needs. Redundant entry provides opportunity for mistakes. Over and over and over again, I see miskeying or fat fingering the numbers of the quantities we're putting in. In one system, it says I have 10, and another it says I have 100, and on and on and on. It's just a really bad situation. And the bottom line impact is that quite often, when we have multiple independent solutions, the integrity of our data diminishes greatly. And the reality is when you get into the business, we collect mountains of data. I remember when I was managing, Wednesday was report day. And sometime during the morning, about a 2-foot stack of reports, green bar reports, was going to show up on my desk. And they actually expected me to read those. We did have a couple of reports that had summary pages, which I found quite useful. But in general, what I found, the only thing that they were good for was building office furniture. So I had end tables and a coffee table. But the data that we collect needs to get boiled down, needs to get summarized into useful information. And that information, as we begin to look at it and look for patterns and combine data from different areas, we begin to gain knowledge. And now this is the beginning of useful information or useful data. Finally, as we add the element of time and we're able to look knowledge and the information over a time period, we actually gain wisdom that we can use in making decisions to run our business. But what I tried to display on the slide here, as the integrity of the data is corrupted, the value of the data and all of the subsequent information, knowledge, and wisdom deteriorates. So it's a dangerous track to go down when we start trying to put in multiple independent systems. Even within an ERP system, since that's often the backbone of the business system, there are oftentimes provided some independent, or not independent, but some advanced applications to provide additional horsepower for specific functions like payroll or CAD or warehouse management. And these are all within the ERP. These are often available. Electronic Kanban, quality, customer relationship management, e-commerce, product lifecycle management, asset management, business intelligence, and even with some feeds to access databases or Excel. But there's a notable area that's missing here that very often doesn't get addressed well within ERP, and I've seen no really good packages in several ERP systems that can be used by the shop floor. So how do we correct the situation? You know, we've got the independent systems that run on their own databases, and we want to overcome some of the data integrity concerns that we've got. So we can spend a whole lot of money integrating these independent systems. Mapping from one database to another is quite an expensive proposition, especially when you've got multiple systems. Or we can change the way we think to strive toward fewer systems. And this system consolidation really can pay some benefits. And what we're talking about with those integrated systems, of course, are MES systems, manufacturing execution systems. This is a single software application that integrates many functions out on the shop floor. Production detail, you can collect machine detail, quality detail, inventory information, Kanban, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And there's just a whole host of details and areas that will benefit from this particular consolidated database structure. We've come to our first polling question, and I would ask you to just put a response in a checkbox as we consider this particular question. When you consider MES solutions, and historically your knowledge of them, do you regard them to help you with capturing machine-level information, or enhancing procedures and communications, or controlling production processes and flows, or all of the above? So if you'd take a moment and answer that. And our results show that all of the above is the view of MES solutions. So that's good. Now this next slide is pretty busy, and I apologize in advance, but to give you an idea of conditions out on the shop floor and in the business as we depend upon information coming from our production operations. The ERP back office folks, or the functional areas that you can see here, they depend upon information coming from production just to keep the business running smoothly. But out on the floor, as activity is taking place, we've got several different types of information that has to get flowing. Receiving and inspection and inventory. This is consider it to be like a goods inbound warehouse, where we receive the material, we issue it, we transfer it to other places, and there's a lot of activity that's taking place there. We also have activities related to human and production activity. And you can see there's a time and attendance. Scheduling and travelers or shop packets are an important part of that data, or the information that's flowing around the floor. We want to track skills. We want to track parent-child serial number genealogies. We want to keep track of labor and routing steps and material that we consume along the way. We also want information on our machines to keep them running smoothly, since we depend upon them so heavily. We want quality information. We need to do our tests, and we need to account for the occasional nonconformance, be able to track that around the system. And last but not least, we need to keep track of our finished goods warehouses. We need to receive goods in from production. We need to be able to pick, pack, and ship them to our customers. So there's just a lot of different activities of different types taking place out on the floor that if we had independent systems handling each one of these, you can imagine what a mess it would be. The advantages of MES first is to reduce the risk from all of those independent databases, all the redundant entry, the clumsiness of the workflow, and one of the things that I see a lot of, if the workflows aren't good, is people simply walk away. They will do their work, but they're not going to interface with a system that's not friendly. And so MES provides the single database, but it's best when it operates in harmony with ERP. We still don't want MES to be one big independent system. We need to have some kind of a live communication loop between ERP and MES so that we keep everything by way of information flowing accurately. And finally, the huge advantage is that MES can provide the easy-to-use user interfaces and production workflows that ERP lacks. I mentioned earlier workflow with independent applications. Now consider the worker being able to go to the system and report what he's produced, consume the material, or the components rather, that he used at his operation, receive the finished item and the finished goods, fill out the quality results, the testing results, and print a label, all in a single workflow. And many times, what I've seen with good workflows is that it takes longer for me to tell you about the workflow than it takes them to execute. It's just a very few steps to accomplish a lot of updating of the system. And good MES systems will give you that kind of capability. We have our second polling question. How is your production work driven? From customer orders and forecasts, ERP planned requirements, pull systems, or none of the above? So if you would take a moment and answer that one. And look at our results. many of you direct from customer orders and forecasts, and that's becoming much more common. I used to see a lot of make-to-stock businesses, and many, many more are becoming make-to-order. So I guess I'm not surprised by that. And the Kanban systems are really gaining traction. So those are interesting responses to that particular polling question. There's a company called IDC that they're analysts kind of along the line of Gartner or Frost and Sullivan. And IDC has looked at MES systems, and they describe them in three categories. There's a bottom-up system, top-down, and inside-out. And what those equate to, the bottom-up systems tend to be machine-centric, and we'll take a look at each of these in a minute. The top-down tend to be ERP-centric, and then the inside-out are procedure-centric. And in a machine-centric system, the focus is on collecting information that pertains to the performance of the equipment, and with heavily automated processes, it's pretty understandable why we go this way. And the areas that benefit from this tend to be manufacturing, for obvious reasons, maintenance, because they're the ones responsible for keeping it all going, and engineering, because they need to have capabilities, information when they're tending to things like routings and even product design issues. And in a machine-centric ERP, we're looking for specific information. And all of these should look pretty familiar if you've been involved in that type of an environment. We want performance, we want statuses, we really want downtime information because of the obvious impact. And we don't just want it at our bottlenecks, we want this everywhere. And we want to support it with KPIs and dashboards that are updated frequently so that I have a real-time view of what's happening out on the floor. The ERP-centric is focused on the back office functionality like customer service and accounting. And they want information off the floor to enable them to answer a lot of questions. And I'm thinking specifically of the customer service, who are concerned about my job statuses, and I need to know, are we going to be able to deliver this order for this customer on time? Finance wants to know everything about cost, and finance is often responsible for payroll, so that they get engaged in the entire attendance reporting, but they need this information, and they usually need it yesterday. And it's going to update the ERP system because of the integration. And finally, the procedure-centric. The information will originate in manufacturing, obviously, but it will kind of feed pieces of information to all the rest of the organization. And the reason that those arrows have dotted lines is because it's oftentimes not quite perfect for those areas. They may get 80% of what they want or need, but the rest of it is going to be a gap. And procedure-centric MES often feeds manufacturing, and it will support manufacturing in a lot of areas, and scheduling, the sequencing of jobs so that we get things done in the right order at the right time to support our on-time deliveries. We need to assign work. We need shop packets to disseminate information. We need material movement capabilities, and Kanban is quite often a concern within the manufacturing area, especially if they are replenishing manufactured items, not always purchased items. And then we have other issues like barcoding for labels, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so once we consider all of these ERP, machine-centric, and process-centric, dealing with the different areas, we have to ask ourselves, does data really come in multiple forms? You know, is there specific data for engineering and finance and production and maintenance and customer service? And the answer to that's got to be really no. It really needs to be the same data harvested correctly by those areas for what they need, but we first need to be able to give them that particular information. So we need to have a single database and one version of the truth instead of all of these divergent databases. So what we're talking about there is an integrated MES, where all of the information that's collected is suitable and satisfactory to all these areas, and it's all done in one database so that we don't have the degradation of our data integrity. And an integrated MES can bring you that particular benefit. Another polling question: do you think your company would benefit from an integrated MES solution? And you can see the answers there: yes, no, unsure, already have one, already have another type of MES solution. So if you would take a moment. And our results are yes, a very small no, unsure, and some of you have already got MES solutions. So we're seeing more and more interest, more and more application, especially as I go to companies to do an implementation. We're taking them off paper-based systems or Excel systems or the widespread independent solutions, seeing many, many, many of those going away with a specific desire to get on one database. And an integrated MES should have broad functionality, as in this slide: production execution for manufacturing orders, that maybe MRP planned orders, lean execution for Kanban, and oh, by the way, we need to have some work centers where they will produce for manufacturing orders, but they also produce to fill Kanban replenishments, material tracking for inventory, and things like the parent-child serialization, work in process quality to be able to do our testing, and workforce management to provide control over certain functions of the workforce, primarily time and attendance, in order to get paid, one of those little details that everybody likes. And in the MES Tool Kit, one of the paradigms that is quickly going away, one of the paradigms that I've run into constantly, is that MES is a data collection system. Well, it's so much more than that. There's so much more functionality. Job sequencing, the ability on a consistent basis to answer the all-important question that every shop worker asks, and that is, what job should I work on next? We've got to have a clean way to communicate that to the workers. Shop packets, all of the information that I might need to perform my work content on a given job, I need to get that. And we can do it on paper, and a lot of companies do it on paper, but little things happen, like the shop packets get lost, or we have a revision change that needs to get communicated, and simply cost. I had a customer tell me once that they calculated the cost of managing a single shop packet through production and accommodating all of the events that might take place. And it was between $75 and $100 per shop packet. So that's something to consider as well. We need to be able to issue material. We need to see our work instructions and deliver them cleanly and reliably. We need constant updates on job status going back into the ERP so the back office folks can see it. I need to be able to run some quality tests, including maybe a coordinate measuring device that's collecting 100 data points when it runs its test. We need to manage Kanban. We need to manage our material receipts. The items that are completed in production need to get to the warehouse, and they need to get there cleanly. We need functional control so that the production worker can't do the warehouse transactions that he might like to do, but we need a way to control that functionally. We need KPIs. I got to have a good place to go to get my current status on a lot of different things. So MES can bring a lot of functionality to the table. Oh, and finally, labeling. Warehouses anymore, I'm seeing fewer and fewer that aren't fully barcode labeled. So many benefits to providing that kind of identification, not only in the warehouse itself, but for work in process as it travels from one work center to another. And let's focus on execution. In order to execute well, the MES should have the ability to let me configure work centers to fit their own processes so that we can simplify and reduce clutter. In other words, if I have a work center where I never work on crews, this particular work center has one man running two machines. Don't make me display to him functionality that pertains to crew clocking because he'll never use it. We need to simplify. We need to integrate workflows to eliminate clumsy navigation. Don't make him go from software to software or from function to function within the software. Let him integrate those flows. Let me job on. Let me report my operation quantity and the fact that I report that the op is complete. And I want to issue my components. And I want to print a label. And I want to receive the item into stock. Let me do all of that in one uninterrupted workflow. And that's the workers learn that much more quickly, and you are much more likely to get really, really good compliance from them. Let me enable rational process design to minimize variation. Let me find a way, or give me a way rather, to communicate at all work centers which job should be the next one worked on in a consistent way. Let me put the next job always at the top of the list, things like that. So we want to be able to have consistency across the enterprise so that there's not a lot of relearning if I move from one area to another. So I want to be able to use a consistent process with minimum variation. Minimize the need for keystrokes. Don't make the workers type. Let them scan. Let them pick from drop-down lists. Let them do as much to remove the potential for error by giving them alternate ways other than typing. And if you can do these things well, you're going to get a lot more accurate and useful data coming off your shop floor because people aren't resistant to it. There was a time when I used to start my training sessions by saying, "This is a mouse." Those days are long gone, and people are a lot more sophisticated in what they are expecting from a system like an MES. So we want to give them a very positive workflow, very positive experience on the floor with the MES, get them to use it. Finally, data synchronization. If we can keep the ERP system and the MES system synchronized, there's a huge benefit to that. And what I mean by that is the ERP system is going to be owned, master data such as bills and routings and orders, et cetera, are owned by ERP. They need to be sent to MES, and MES can then execute based on the current information in ERP. Then, as activity takes place on the floor, the factory data is sent into the ERP system with all of the quantity information on performance, completion, how many hours I worked on each job, what are my attendance time, inventory changes, et cetera. By keeping these two databases synchronized, we essentially create a single database because they will match. So there's a huge advantage to this in maintaining the integrity of your data. And especially so if the ERP system can be configured to apply the same data validation rules for entry that the ERP system does. Now, revisiting our data interdependence. We still have ERP and production needing different data points, kind of the same data points, a lot of the same data points. But now with an integrated database using an MES, now all of the functional areas get the same data. So it's not only integrated to the process, but they're integrated across functional areas so that by seeing the same data, we can manage our businesses using good information, not corrupted, and we can be confident that what we're seeing is what's actually happening out in the shop floor. So this very important element is addressed well in an integrated MES. So in summary, what we've talked about is a vision towards system consolidation. How do we get rid of all of these multiple independent databases? Maintain the integrity of our data interdependence. A little bit of an insight into different types of MES systems. And finally, the benefits of a fully integrated MES and ERP system. There are products available to do a lot of different things, and I would expect that you'll be able to find something that helps you. So I hope that this was time well spent for you. I tried to present from my experience, so I want to thank you for your attendance, and I'll hand things back over to Mike.
Okay. Thank you, Mike Kennick, for that very informative session. And now we'll bring in Paperless President Mike Leroy to help answer questions for our listeners as well. Mike, are you with us?
Yes, sir, I am. Thank you.
Okay. All right. That makes 3 mics, so hang in there, everybody. This is Mike Anderson, of course. So we did receive some questions, and it would be nice if we can get to all of them before our time is up. Do remember, though, that if we run out of time before answering every question, those unanswered questions will be forwarded to Paperless, and a response will be forthcoming. So, gentlemen, let's start with this question. In integrated MES, do you advocate mastering data in the proper system? In parentheses, we have PLM, ERP, MES, and then using integrations to consume the original data in MES. So very quickly again, so do you advocate mastering the data in the individual systems, PLM, ERP, MES, for example, and then using integrations to consume the original data in MES?
Mike, I can take this one if you want. This is Mike Mike Leroy. Yes, I would say we definitely sponsor this, the orientation of this question. I think some of Mike's latter slides point to illustrating the fact that we do extract data out of ERP. We oftentimes find that ERP is the only thing to lean on in our customers' environments. Many of them do not have PLM systems. But we do recognize that a lot of the time the data is born in PLM. And ideally, it would be nice to be able to master the data out of those systems if and when they exist. In our particular system and in our environment, we're able to extract data from a variety of systems, but we would very much advocate the data living mastered in one source. So ideally, I think when we see these types of questions or inquiries, it would be nice to get everything from one common database, but in the world of software for business and manufacturing environments, we're just simply not there yet. So we do have to leverage the data that resides in either PLM or ERP as the basis for the data we collect in MES solutions.
Okay, let's move along. Here, the next question we have is somebody says that they're curious about what you do in China in terms of MES.
We have a few deployments in China that have been brought to us through one of our European-based customers. That customer is probably one of our most demanding companies that we work with. In fact, in Mike's earlier representation of the larger company that is on the higher end of that range, that was the company that is $10 billion in sales. They have several plants in China, India, and expanding to Brazil. It is what has brought us our Chinese translations, and it's running very effectively there.
10 billion is not a number that one looks at lightly. So moving on to another question then. Someone asks, if we are using traditional JDE and want to shift to paperless, what is the best way to transition to paperless?
Well, I'm going to assume JDE means J.D. Edwards as an ERP system. Our system is not intended, or certainly not advertised as being a replacement for ERP. So if JDE is referring to J.D. Edwards as ERP, it would supplement J.D. Edwards and not displace it. We would tap into the J.D. Edwards database, pull information for bills and routings and manufacturing orders and so on down to our database and really be complementary to JDE.
I'm sure they appreciate that. Okay, here's another one, and this is a good question. They all are. How long does it typically take to realize a return on investment from an MES solution?
Well, that's a good question. It's a difficult question because, as you saw, I think, in Mike's presentation, in our world, we advocate a holistic approach to shop floor systems. So when you take on such a broad-reaching and large scope in the MES arena, it suggests you have quite a project ahead of you. But that said, we see our typical production execution implementations take as little as about 3 months. If you step further into full-blown inventory and Kanban methodologies along with our quality systems, those implementations can take upwards of 9 to 12 months simply because there's not as much data historically available in ERP that support those areas. In other words, electronic Kanban systems are not typically represented in ERP, so all of that definition of Kanban loops and Kanban strategies needs to be represented in a solution like ours. Likewise, for quality, typically for control plans and test parameters and the like, is not typically found in ERP. And as a result, we simply cannot extract it. It all has to be defined in our system. And that pushes the implementation time up dramatically. So,
and depending upon,
go ahead, Mike.
Excuse me, depending upon the scope of use that you're anticipating in your workforce and the degree of change that this is driving, oftentimes what I have found is that phasing in the implementation, certain functions, one or a couple at a time, rather than forcing the entire thing is a little bit easier for the workforce to adapt to. So that'll extend the implementation time a little bit.
Good point.
Okay. Let's go on to another one while we have time here. This is a question you'll like. How does one convince management to look at this? Presumably they mean MES or your system.
That's a great question. And it is a difficult one to answer. We share that, as you can imagine, as a provider of software. We oftentimes get sponsorship very easily and readily in manufacturing leadership, and then you've got to get executive management on board. We can help with those types of things through our executive overview presentations. I think the ROI studies play a big role in it. When you can come to management with adequate ROI, that is well thought out and well understood, and then in turn well represented, I think it gets their attention. So I would say do your homework. They don't want to hear generalizations. They want to hear specifics. We also have a couple of, in our case, services offerings that can help you explore for adequate ROI and determine the appropriateness of the fit for the application in your environment. And all of those things speak to, doing your homework, I guess, in a general sense, to prepare for a presentation to management. We oftentimes run into people who express that, this or that is not in the budget. Well, we always say that if there's a return on investment, you're already paying for it. So it's a matter of getting the message across to executive management that there is indeed an effective return on investment that only comes through good homework.
Okay, another one. How do you deploy resources to customer locations? And they ask about consultants in various parts of various states. But the real question is, how do you deploy resources to customer locations?
Well, we have consultants like Mike on board who go out and do our training and implementation consulting. We also have a couple of affiliate partners that help us with getting into certain locales. But typically in the United States, and even, let me just limit the answer to the United States. In the United States, we typically will take on those implementations ourselves. And in our European and Asian customers, we oftentimes will lean on a partner.
Okay, we have time for one more, and it's a pretty easy one to answer because I imagine there's more than one answer. The question is, how long does it take to implement an MES solution?
Well, again, I guess I would say that depends on scope, and I'll fall back to my previous representation of about 3 months when doing traditional labor and production execution tracking, and as high as 9 to 12 months when you get into more sophisticated inventory tracking and driving demand through Kanban as well as quality tracking. I probably stepped on that question earlier.
Oh, that's indeed we did. Well, thank you both, Mike and Mike. We're kind of out of time here, but for those of you listening and watching, as promised, all unanswered questions will be passed along to Paperless, and you can expect a reply via email. Also, please note, this entire webinar will be available for replay by 4 p.m. Eastern Time today. And you can access it by using the same sign-in link you used earlier. Beyond our webinar series, SME and Advanced Manufacturing Media have a host of ways to keep in touch with the latest developments in manufacturing. For instance, the September issue of Manufacturing Engineering has a software feature article by our own Patrick Wozniak on redefining PLM. You can find that feature plus our monthly software update columns and all of the latest software and controls news on the Software and Controls channel of our website, and that's at www.advancedmanufacturing.org. In addition, upcoming SME events allow you to look at and learn about the latest in manufacturing technologies and techniques. These events include WestTech in Los Angeles from September 15th through the 17th, and the Canadian Manufacturing and Technology Show. CMTS is Canada's largest display of manufacturing equipment and technology. It's being held in Mississauga, Ontario on September 28th through October 1st. All of you, thanks for joining us today. We hope you found the presentation informative.